One of the things that most readers of the Boruto story will agree upon is the fact that Boruto's story took a massive shift when it came to the whole concept of omnipotence when it was introduced, and all of a sudden Boruto went from being this spoiled little brat who had every privilege possible and every advantage thinkable given to him, and all the talent in the world and a cushy lifestyle that he took for granted, and omnipotence had flipped everything onto his head in just a matter of a few moments. Boruto was now suddenly an outsider, and 99% of the planet that had no memory of him being the son of Naruto, who is hailed as the second coming of Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage. Instead, everyone's memories, they have been altered to believe that Kawaki, he was the one born to Naruto and Hinata, and Kawaki was the boy who helped save the village twice before his 13th birthday rolled around, despite Kawaki being a cyborg and nobody ever having a memory of Naruto's son having a mechanically enhanced body the way that Kawaki's was altered. This of course led to Boruto having to go off on the run, hiding from familiar faces and knowing that he could never return home to his village, because the moment he did so, his treaty with Ada, it would be null and void, and she'd go back to helping Shikamaru and Kawaki find Boruto. But with all these recent events that have taken place in the Boruto 2 Blue Vortex story, I thought it was time to pull up a chair and end this month off with a discussion on one of the most talked about topics following the release of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 9, which is whether or not Kurama knows the truth about what happened and what this potentially holds for the narrative if this does end up being the case. Based on what I've read down in the comment section, there's a good number of you who are under the impression that Kurama, he doesn't know the truth about omnipotence, and I disagree for the following reason. I alluded to it in the chapter review that waiting to get more info on Kurama's revival, it was the better thing to do, the smart thing to do, because the circumstances of Kurama's revival, it would impact a few other things. But looking at the question of whether or not Kurama has been affected by omnipotence is a pretty straightforward thing in my opinion, but it's going to come down to which side of the fence you're on. Do you believe that Kurama is the same one who was inside of Naruto, or do you think this is a new Kurama? To play devil's advocate on that point, some of the lettering in Japanese, it left a little bit up to interpretation, even more so than Japanese to English normally does, because the lettering, it came off a bit vague with Kurama's statement to Himawari in terms of was it being used for familiarity or was Kurama speaking as a stranger, which reminder, Japanese does not translate word to word to English due to how context heavy the language is, which is why things like Google Translate should not be your first option. Hence, we have people saying Kami Otsuki is a new Otsuki, which I'll do a video on that later. A lot of it is left up to interpretation of the translator, but if we go with the assumption that this is the same Kurama as the one that Naruto had in Boruto Naruto Next Generations, there are seeds that are planted in the story that would imply that he would be unaffected by omnipotence. Now, the first one being is that we've seen that the Shinju themselves, they appear to be unaffected by what happened with omnipotence. They seem to know pretty plainly that Boruto is Naruto's kid, or rather, that's the implication. It hasn't been directly stated, but Boruto has been referred to as being Boruto Tsuki, not Boruto Uzumaki, so it is worth noting that lack of intel there. However, Jura does seem to have a pretty good grasp on who is who, and that book that he carries around appears to have intel on all the people in Konoha, which while omnipotence, it might alter things like memories, physical evidence of the previous life, such as the nanotech inside of Kawaki's body, academy records of Boruto having the scar over his eye, and in the case of Jura, having the books that potentially have information written down on them about everything that happened before omnipotence. None of that stuff is altered. It's just people's memories. If we go with the assumption that Jura and the other Shinju, they're not affected by omnipotence, which you could argue that, because they are connected to the god tree, then you could kind of argue the same thing would hold true for Kurama as well, since the 9 Biju were originally part of the 10 Tails, albeit it was a different 10 Tails, but it was still a 10 Tails nonetheless. So you would make the argument, hey, it extends over to them. While there is some logic there, I do think it's worth pointing out the other side to this conversation, which is what these discussions are for, which is that Biju immunity line, it might not apply here, and I bring that up for a few different reasons. Going back to the Naruto manga, we've seen a couple times already that there are things that Biju, while they have protection from most things, they are still susceptible to certain things that are brought upon by the Otsuki clan. Like for instance, the infinite Tsukiyomi, which would have worked on Naruto if we go by Sasuke's actions in volume 70 of Naruto, and we see it worked on Killer Bee despite it being a genjutsu, and Biju inside of Jinchuriki couldn't break free of it. However, where you stand on that point is irrelevant relevant to the next point being made, which is if we look at what the lore has already told us in Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, that Himawari had Kurama's chakra physically inside of her, then you can make the argument Kurama might not be immune. So in chapter 1 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, we got a sign that Himawari did have her memories altered by Omnipotence. When she was finishing up her training with Chocho and she was sitting there with the members of Team 10, we had a moment where she revealed that in her memory, she remembered Boruto as being the boy who saved herself and Naruto from Delta's chakra beams, and that she could still sense Naruto but couldn't understand why, which now we know why. It's because of Kurama. This is big to point out because it means that having Kurama's chakra, it didn't protect her from the effects of Omnipotence. If we take what she said at face value, that her memories have been altered. That's the other part of the reason I was so adamant in the chapter review that while there's this urge for people to just say, I want to know what happens next and grow impatient, we see it every month with the Boruto manga cycle because people have a short attention span now. This is where we have to let the story cook a little bit when it comes to Kurama being side of Himawari, because what we're seeing here is classic storytelling at work. And what I mean by this, I'm not saying, oh my God, this is peak. I'm not saying that. When I refer to classic storytelling, I'm talking about the craft of writing itself. The whole reason you bring a character back or introduce new characters into a story is to shake things up, to keep the readers on their toes, to keep the story from being too predictable. Plot being predictable is one thing, character writing being predictable is a completely different thing. And unfortunately, a lot of shonen fans who consume shonen content tend to focus more so on the plot aspect of writing when a lot of these stories are more character driven. So a new character or a returning character, it opens up more from a narrative dynamic that might not have been there otherwise under normal circumstances if you kept everything the same. So for instance, it forces two characters who you would normally never see interact with one another do just that. It opens up other branches for other aspects of storytelling, particularly when a story is as character driven as Naruto and its two sequels, Boruto Naruto Next Generations and Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, have been utilizing more character driven approach to push the story forward. With Kurama inside of Himawari, you open the door for a few possibilities depending on which route you go, and these are two characters that under most normal circumstances you wouldn't expect them to have any real interaction with each other. We have that one scene in the day that Naruto became Hokage in manga format where they interacted. Every time else after that, that was basically filler. But I bring this up to say that's kind of like saying if you would have had Sasuke interact with Hinata, that changes quite a bit because those two characters normally do not interact with one another. So from a conflict perspective, it could potentially pay off what Damon warned Kawaki about, which is the arrival of the Shinju. It'd start the downfall of Kawaki because it would lead to people asking all these questions. Hey, Kawaki said that Naruto's killed by Boruto. With these guys, they're in the village and they're looking for Naruto. Something doesn't smell right. And to make it worse, they're inside of a shinobi village. So even with Kawaki saying that, if these Shinju are asking questions, they're going to start looking into it as well. The Shinju, they've already said, hey, we're looking for Naruto. Himawari is already confirmed to have the Nine Tails inside of her. And people are already starting to ask questions, hey, why is there a connection to Himawari and the Nine Tails? If this is the exact same Kurama as before, and he was unaffected by Omnipotence, that opens the door for a major conflict for Kawaki because Naruto's rightful child, Himawari, she would now know the truth. And that comes with a big can of worms that are being opened up. So if Kurama is affected by Omnipotence and he has no memory of Boruto being Naruto's son, it just sets another time bomb for what happens when Kurama and Himawari do eventually learn what happened with Naruto, and it makes us as the audience monitor the ticking time bomb known as Kawaki that much closer. Because the problem with keeping up a lie is that eventually it catches up to you, because a lie eventually becomes too much to maintain. Even with Kawaki having the crux of omnipotence that he is privileged to have because it is doing most of the heavy lifting for him in this regard, the fact that Kawaki has some blood on his hands right now and the walls are closing in, it makes him dangerous, and this potentially adds more danger for Kawaki. If Kurama is affected by omnipotence, then it also adds more to the lore because it gives us more information about the 9 Biju, and it opens up the door to learn more about the 10 Tails and just how chakra in general works, especially because Boruto has been made aware of Himawari having a connection to the 9 Tails, and Momoshiki just happens to be someone we haven't seen in the entirety of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, and he just happens to be someone who who we know is in possession of knowledge of all things Shinjutsu, and he, most importantly, has previously been able to see a future where Naruto couldn't pass on his chakra, albeit he was looking at Boruto when he said it, but this gives us a door into learning more about that future sight ability that Momoshiki has, and potentially confirms some of the suspicions that we have as a community, like what Momoshiki sees, and by extension Boruto isn't 100% set in stone. If this ends up being a different Kurama though, with no memory of Boruto, or it's a different thing because it's a side effect of burial mode, since Biju, when they're reborn, haven't been shown getting reborn as a bite-sized Biju you can stick in your pocket like the one we have now at Himawari, but rather when they're reborn, they're in their full adult size. It adds more layers to the burial mode technique and about what we know about Biju. Also, depending on how you let things play out from a battle perspective, it could lead to Himawari getting a monster increase because it would be both halves of Kurama inside of her, and a Biju's chakra, according to the lore, is always stronger whenever it's inside of a Jinchuriki's body. So you have the potential for more massive upscaling for Himawari, which I know is going to piss some people off, but the fact of the matter is that it would follow already set lore, so there's no reason to get your panties in a bunch. As longtime viewers of the channel know, while I do like to dabble every now and then with some of the scaling stuff, what truly excites me the most about a series, especially one like Naruto, is the amount of lore and the character work that the stories have, because they're absolute hits that never seem to end. Part of the reason why I can upload daily and never run out of stuff to talk about is because I just love Naruto as a franchise, rivaled only by my love for Star Wars and Rurouni Kenshin. Both of those are lore pits. Even with the faults that Boruto has, and trust me, it has a lot of faults, one of the things that the series does manage to do is that it manages to continue to add on to and build on to what we've already been introduced to, while adding its own twist, which is what a sequel is supposed to do. Just on Naruto based topics, no Boruto, I've already done 1,200 lore videos on Naruto according to the spreadsheet I have on my desktop, and there's still another 15 pages of Naruto topics that I haven't covered, like say videos on the Sage of Six Paths and the information about Gar in the blank period. We just do more Boruto based content because that's what a majority of you guys want. And when you get chapters like this with Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, that fascinates me so much because it's clearly planting seeds in place, regardless as to the path that it chooses to go down to add more lore to the series. And you get new interesting dynamics for the characters, and we get to rewrite certain things that might have been certainties in the past, because as Momoshiki and Yamato told us, Otsutsuki Clan's Shinjutsu is the true power of the Naruto universe, and everything we saw in Naruto's manga was a mere cheap imitation, which by extension means any rules that we thought were set in stone as clearly defined laws, they might as well be on the table to be reversed. Much like Itachi said, every jutsu has a weakness. I'll take it a step further and say every rule has an exception, which is why it's never a good idea to deal with absolutes unless you're making an analogy. And this revival of Kurama is a great example of that, which this video on the left dives deeper into that,